My name is Peter Walker. Today, as part of an ongoing series called Global Arena, I'm going to be touching on the role of Henry Kissinger, who recently passed away. So, if I think about what qualified him to play that role, which really has been central literally for the last 5 decades, there are four different dimensions that come to mind. One is he had a very deep understanding of China itself. A lot of people can explain facts and figures and dates on China, but when you ask the more subtle question, what is it that really makes China tick? The vast majority of people in the US, including the government, really have virtually no idea of what it is that drives China. So when I reread his book on China, he put a lot of emphasis on the role of Confucian values, which I think if you ask, the vast majority of people in the West, what are Confucian values? They really don't have any understanding. And yet, from my point of view, having studied a lot of history of China, it is really what has defined China as a civilization. And even though there have been changes in dynasties over time and changes in government, and there have been wars, at the end of the day, China always reverts to those core values, which I would summarize by saying self improvement through hard work and education uh, for the betterment not of the individual, and this is a key point, but for the betterment of your family and society. So Confucian values he had a very deep understanding of. I think he clearly understands the historical role that has led to a strong central government over the years in China. He also, I think, has a keen understanding that leaders are advanced in Chinese government meritocratically. Americans have a very hard time understanding that. But having spent a lot of time with Chinese leaders, the individuals are just very impressive from an education point of view and the richness of their background. So I would say his first unique qualification is a very deep understanding of what makes China tick at every level. I believe his second primary understanding has to do with his relationship with US presidents. Kissinger had that influence. He was the Secretary of State under Nixon, and he's really been close to every American president up through and including Biden. The third, and this is also of central importance given the recent conflicts between the US and China, he just has a deep understanding as to why the US, especially its government, does not understand or trust China. One is, we went through in the US a Cold War for many decades, largely focused on the Soviet Union. And so for most Americans, the word communist and communism is a huge negative. It's viewed as the ultimate in anti America. So that phrase, in and of itself, creates a negative feeling in many people's mind. The second source of misunderstanding that's understandable, the US has been the number one economy and the strongest military in the world. The US is keenly aware that that is going to change. Not necessarily on the military side, but certainly on the economy side, where China has already passed the US on a purchasing parity basis and is going to pass the US ultimately in terms of absolute size of GDP. So, if you've been number one for 150 years, you're not very comfortable with the idea that you're about to lose that position. And you're not inclined to listen to other people for advice. And I like to say it's not that different than the position of the Qing government during the 19th century. That when the English came over with all of the inventions from the Industrial Revolution that they had been experiencing for 50 years, the Chinese expressed absolutely no interest whatsoever in understanding what they were bringing and what the implications were. And so to some extent, you get the same feeling in the US. But that is a very important barrier to the US developing a deeper understanding of the real China. The third misconception is that China is a military threat. This one is really, when you just think about the reality of history, is the most far-fetched of all. The reality is, if you look at China's record in terms of foreign aggression, over the last 1,000 years, all you can point to is a couple of very brief minor skirmishes. If you compare that with the US's track record going back to Vietnam and everything that's happened since, we have been far more aggressive than China ever was. And a lot of the underpinning of this is the military industrial complex. At the end of the day, the US's military budget is approaching $900 billion. So you've got a lot of companies and a lot of jobs and a lot of economic value tied up in the defense industry. And the defense industry needs an enemy. When Russia became far less formidable as an enemy, China became the clear target. And then the final underlying reason goes back to the media. At the end of the day, media is a business in the US. Going back to Trump's coining of the phrase evil empire in China, that's what sells papers, that's what captures eyeballs. So the media writes almost nothing positive about China. And that's, for a lot of people, that's where they get their information on China. And it's highly distorted, totally imbalanced. But it is what it is. So the third strength that Kissinger has brought to the party is a really deep understanding of why the U.S. does not trust China, and those reasons collectively are quite powerful. But then the fourth and final strength that he had, which for many people is maybe the most surprising, is he built a very strong trust-based relationship with leaders in China. I think what the Chinese leaders, starting with Zhou Enlai, really was the first close relationship, and then followed quickly by Deng Xiaoping. They quickly realized that Kissinger had a really deep understanding of China. He was well plugged in with the leaders of the US. He did understand all the misunderstandings that were out there, and he genuinely wanted to provide advice and to be constructive for Chinese leaders. At the end of the day, he's going to be missed. There's no one else who can fill his shoes the way he did. I think both countries benefited enormously by the fact that he was able to use his perceptive thinking and insights and depth of knowledge of both sides to basically defuse otherwise tense situations and to steer outcomes towards peace as opposed to conflict.